Um, so for as long as I can remember, our guest today has been like my absolute favorite person on the planet, and we've remained in touch after all these years. Our lives are crazy the way they're parallel, intertwined. And just, I thought it would be amazingly valuable for you guys to be able to interact with, to me, one of the most creative and influential Olympic champions in the history of our sport. And so with that, I would love to bring on to our little Zoom stage, and two-time Olympian, or three-time Olympian, two-time Olympic medalist, one absolute gold, and four-time world champion, the legend Christopher Dean. And I don't know how we get him right up in front, but Chris, I reached out to him yesterday and I said, "Do you want to come join us?" And he said, "Sure." So we're all in lockdown right now. And you can see from Chris, he's got a little bit of cabin scruff going, which I think is a good look for him. And Chris, thanks so much for joining us today. Yep, I can't hear you right now. Let's see, get your video going or your audio. There you go.
Am I up and running?
You're up and running. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, Scott. Thanks for inviting me on. Yeah, our lives have definitely been parallel, isn't it? We started our first World Championships together, and
before that, remember?
In Oberstdorf, and yeah.
Where were you? Let me see. What were you in Oberstdorf?
First year we got second, and then we
so
won it the next year. Fancy that. And what was your first Worlds? What was your first?
It was Ottawa. How about
Ottawa?
And yeah. You remember?
It came first then, yeah?
No, Ottawa Worlds in 78.
Oh, 78. Oh, that's a good one. I want to say, was it 11 or 9?
I think you were 11th.
11th, yeah.
So was I. So
here we go.
And then first Olympics was Lake Placid. What did you guys come in there?
I think we were 5th there.
So was I. And then
we could be twins.
I except for that you haven't aged and I have, but that's just because of my unique hobby of collecting life-threatening illness. And and then I have 2 birth boys. And how many do you have? 2 birth boys. Yep. So yeah, and then from 81 to 84, how many competitions did you and Jayne lose?
None.
Neither did I. So, we've got this pattern emerging, Oh, and your first Porsche, what color was that?
The first what?
The Porsche you bought, like the car that Jill gave you.
That would be a blue one.
Oh, so was mine. So, remember I used to park next to yours, and it was kind of, you had to use your key to figure out whose was whose. So anyway, we've got this crazy, like parallel
completely
existence. Parallel. I wish I were as influential as you were in your time Scott. In skating. Mm-hmm. No, I mean you truly changed everything. But I want to go back because a lot of our kids, are on the beginning of their journey, and a lot of our skaters are just sort of kind of finding their identities in all of this. And they always look at people that have done well in the Olympics, and they think, it's just like they had an easy road, and it was just everything was just done, and it was just like they were anointed, and it was just going to be theirs no matter what. I mean, your situation, my situation were similar in ways that we came from extremely humble beginnings.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. No, my father was a coal miner. My mother, and he worked 7 days a week.
Yeah, that's a
tough job. Yeah, and he worked 7 days a week for most of his life. We lived in what you'd call an apartment, we'd call a flat, for most of my young life until I was about 15. And so I also, when I left school, and I left school at 15 and a half, and joined the police force as a cadet to begin with, and then became a regular policeman. But during all of that, I continued skating. I started skating maybe a bit later than most, but I was about 10 when I started.
Yeah, me too. I was 9. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the skating was always there, but what the problem was, obviously, as you went into the workforce and at 15 and a half, you have to go to work for 8 or 9 hours a day. And then eventually when I became a policeman, a full-fledged policeman at 18 and a half, you have shift work. And so you could be on starting at 6 in the morning or starting at midnight. And so you'd have to find your training hours outside of those times. So that meant, going into the rink at all hours. And then after we'd finished, and I'm sure a lot of, skaters from our past have done this before, but we had to surface the ice as well, because after we'd finished, the next morning, the figures would come in and want to do figures. And so Jayne and I had to get the Zamboni out. And it wasn't an easy process because the Zamboni was on a lip this high. Yeah. So we had to get these huge metal ramps out. And then Jayne would sort of guide me down like an airplane coming into landing, which wasn't always exact, that's for sure. And then we'd have to do the ice, get them back out, reverse it off. It was quite the, it made you appreciate later in life when you could go to an ice rink and get full training. I mean, we used to grab an hour or 30 minutes here and there, even on public sessions very early on in our career.
Wow.
I'm going to get that violin out now.
No. It's like, I walked 40 miles on my hands and knees through 3 feet of snow to get to my school, and you guys are, it's all that grumpy old man stuff. But it's not that; it's just the way things were back, back then. And
there was no ceremony or anything.
From day one, was it always going to be ice dance, or did you start off in single skating, or what was that?
Pretty much from day one, ice dance. My parents had been social dancers, ballroom. Dancing, so they enjoyed it, only in a social setting, not in any way competitive or anything. So as I started skating, it was an athletic sport, but they sort of encouraged me to take ice dance. I think I did singles for 2 weeks once, and I was good at lateral jumps.
That you have a ceiling floor, bam.
Health and safety as a kid, I think my parents suggested maybe
I was good
to dance.
I was good at horizontal jumps too for most of my young life, but we kind of got past that. So Jayne, how did you meet Jayne? How did that all work?
Well, Jayne was she started when she was 9, but she got a pair skating partner. And she actually became national champion at the age of 12 or 13, as a pair skater. And so she was the bee's knees of the rink at that time.
The bee's knees.
Yeah, very English expression, but, elite skater that we always had to keep out of the way of. And after they won the championship, her partner decided he wanted to go off to London or other places and left Jayne to be a single skater. Wow. And at that time, I had Janet Sawbridge, who was a well-known ice dancer, world medalist, came up to teach me and my former partner. And that lasted about 6 weeks. And that quit, and she wanted to go to London. And so we were looking out for a partner. And in those days, the mobility was not like it is today. And so, we were from the same rink. And
that Jayne was in
Nottingham, in the Midlands in the UK.
Yeah,
Robin Hood, all of that.
Robin Hood, yes.
And so Janet suggested we try out, but Jayne, I said, but Jayne's a pair skater.
Yeah.
But she kept up all her dance while she'd been doing singles and pairs. And so we got together, and it was one of those early morning 6 a.m.s on the rink. And Nottingham Ice Rink at that time, it was cavernous, dark, dank. place. You know, we would go in and put the lights on, and you'd see the rats and mice scurrying
away.
Yeah, and you could see the mist rising, and it wasn't sort of a paradise ice rink to go inside.
Yeah, we're that way in Nashville too. The rinks are really, you know, rats scurrying. No, actually, no, it's the opposite, actually. So our kids have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so she put us together, and the first thing that she did, she made us go into a dance hall and put our hips like touching. And for us at that time,
awkward.
It was, where do you look? And she made us stand like that for a couple of minutes until we got over it. And then beyond that session, we did the session, we got on with it, came back the next day and the next day. By the end of the week, she said, well, do you think you want to be a partnership? Is it going to work? And we were a bit superstitious, and so we decided that we wouldn't commit to it, but we'd let her know when we were ready. And we still haven't decided.
After all these years?
47 years later.
You're still working it out and kind of wondering whether you're going to actually go all in on this thing. Yeah. Right, I get it. Yeah.
Don't try and fix what's not broken.
So tell me about Jayne's like early, I mean, she was a pair skater, but what was her family life? I mean, I know yours was, you know, you came from a very humble family. What was her family like?
Same for Jayne. I mean, her father worked for Raleigh Bicycles, putting bicycles together in Nottingham, because that's where Raleigh originated. And then eventually they bought a news agents, which is like they sell the newspapers, but they have sweeties in there. And, you know, it's sort of, that was a little paradise when you go into the shop, because it was full of candy. Yeah. And they lived above the shop, but in a very, in town, you know, very simple shop. Very working class as well. And when she finished school when she was 16, I think, and she went to work for an insurance agency. So she was an office clerk for a few years before we both decided to give it up. But so when I was on the beat as a policeman, part of my area was the city centre square, and we were fortunate that it was, you know, it was literally a square where people would congregate. And Jayne's office was, you know, first floor up, and she'd sort of look out, and I'd be able to wave, and she'd wave, and we go, what time? Yeah, I'll be there on time at the rink. So we'd do things like that. And sometimes I'd see her in the street, and if I was actually in a police car, I'd put the siren and the lights on and stop her in the street and really embarrass her. As if she was being arrested. Yeah.
So those first years, you're kind of like, you know, just sort of awkward, and you're just trying to figure it out. And
yeah, well, our coach at the time was very proactive in making us think for ourselves, and certainly for when it came to finding music, getting costumes. Yeah, I mean, one day she said, have you got the music? And we said, no, we haven't found any yet. She said, well, leave the ice and come back when you've got music.
Oh, okay.
So she sort of handed over the reins to us to be proactive. And so, you know, we had to then come back with music if we wanted to skate.
And who found the music that first time? Did you find it, or did Jayne find it?
I think, you know, it was, to begin with, it was all a bit hit and miss, wasn't it? It was like, because records, we didn't have stores that you could go in and necessarily listen.
Yeah,
you had to buy it.
Yeah,
and so
that's a commitment.
We didn't have that much money, so sometimes it would have to be something you either knew or the cover looked great. But eventually, we forged a relationship with our local radio station, the BBC radio station.
Smart, yeah.
And so we would go in there, and they had you know, every BBC radio station across the country had their own record library. And so when artists ever brought out an album, they'd send them to all the radio stations. And
That
so
little
eventually,
that little hole punch in the corner that says this is not for sale. This is a freebie,
exactly.
right?
So we went into Radio Nottingham, and there was, rows of records, and for us that was like paradise. That we
You must have been short of breath walking in there. It's like
it was unreal. I
yeah.
have to say, but it's all on vinyl. You have to imagine, and they, there'd be people watching to make sure that you didn't scratch the records, and then we'd be listening. But we would spend literally hours in there. People thought that we worked at the station at some point, because we'd go there several days a week and just troll through the record library, and it was there that we actually found Mac and Mabel.
Wow, because that was a musical that existed for a long time.
That's right, yeah. But it was also it was put into an overture, and it became a complete piece. And I think that was sort of one of our first times that we sort of, people looked at us and said, "Oh, that's really original and different and creative." And so because it was a musical based around two people, their love-hate relationship, and it was all built around making movies. So it really fit the theme.
Yeah, and that, I want to get to that, but just, I think, again, for our skaters, just to understand that whatever their dreams, whatever their aspirations are, whatever, it's all rooted in sort of these humble beginnings where you're just trying to figure it out and work it out and trying to like make each day work, and what do I have to do in order to get to the next level. And so getting back to those early years, and when you started competing, what were your results like in the very beginning?
I think we were kind of in the middle to begin with, because it's all about being seen.
Yeah.
And getting your name out there. But I think for us, we didn't have a lot of lesson time. And so when you talk about these early traits, we were always, when we were on the ice, we were self-motivated in what we needed to do. And so the practice time, sometimes if there were short times, we'd utilize it to its nth degree, because we knew it was only a short time. And then, as you get to international levels, that the Eastern Bloc countries, it's what they do, it's their work. And for us, we had to go to work to pay for our skating. And so it was like we knew that they were working when we weren't. And so when we had the time on the ice, we had to utilize every second of it, to be honest. And so that made us appreciate the ice time. It wasn't a space to go to and go, we've got friends here, we'll hang out, we've got time on our hands. It was precious, is what it was, because you can't get time back.
Yes. A day missed is a day wasted. Yeah. And any time on the ice that's not being utilized properly is wasted, and allowing your competition to get ahead of you. And then it was, Pakimova and Gorshkov won in 76. Do you remember who won in 19? It was Vinaychuk and Karpanazov, right?
It was Moiseev and Menenkov, and the Olympics were, yes.
I love them.
I love Karpanazov. Yeah. But I think Min and Mo, as we used to call them, Moiseev and Menenkov, were our idols. That when we would watch skating from the worlds or Europeans, they were the people that they were our idols, our stars that we looked up to. And then that first time you go to competition and you're in competition with those people, you have to pinch yourself to some degree and say, we're not worthy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I love them. And I think, as I'm sure for the same reasons you did, because they didn't normally just stay in the box, right? They didn't normally just because back then ice dancing was based in the classic ballroom rhythms, and you had to show versatility, but you had to stay in that little box. And they were always bringing in odd rhythms and unique choreography, and they were just sort of allowing their their look. I mean, she was stunningly beautiful. He was a very handsome guy. They were very tall, as I remember. You know, everybody's tall to me, but you know, you look back and they used their physicality, their ingenuity, and they weren't going to be restrained to stay in that little place. And that's so logical to me that you would like them that much and they would become kind of role models for you.
Yeah, the thing that I think that we saw about them was the quality of flow, and everything just seemed to move from one move to the next move. There wasn't an ending to anything. It was just organic.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we've always tried to do within our skating, that there's not like, well, here's a highlight, then we're going to rush over there and do a highlight, then we're going to go over here. But it was all connected. The highlight wasn't necessarily the key to it. It was how you got to the next place. The interest, the unique way of moving. And that's what they did. And to some degree, you know, they were our idols, but also we used to watch Fred and Ginger from the movies constantly as well. And just to see that ease and quality of movement that they both had, stylistically and connectively as well. You know, the romantic side and the
chemistry.
The chemistry, exactly.
Yeah. And
Very
I remember,
so.
you know, you look back on all that time, and again, this is for our young skaters, when Fred Astaire, that's who he's referring to, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, when Fred Astaire went in for, you know, an audition one time, his audition remarks were, can't sing, can't act, dances a little. He became a legend, you know, so rejection, you know, is a part of the process. And for you guys, I mean, coming up, obviously, you know, you were doing this and you said you were in the middle of the pack in the beginning years. You know, how did you see and how did you strategize to kind of keep climbing that ladder?
You know, I think a lot of people go, oh, well, they're natural, aren't they? They're just natural. They just got it.
It's just given. It's just,
It's a given. But the more I know, there are people that have some natural ability, but it actually comes down to the work, and it comes down to the perseverance. It comes down to the repetition. It comes down to the desire to achieve something on every session that you go on to. And I think that's
nothing replaces it. Doesn't matter how good you are. Nothing replaces work. Nothing.
No. And also what we would, and the way that we would try and work is that a bad day, people outside of what you felt wouldn't see it.
Yeah.
And so it was a question of working to the degree that when you felt it was bad, other people would be going, or the coach, well, it didn't look it to me. But that's what you're aiming for, as opposed to having a bad day and giving up on it.
And I always thought that people can see the effort, right? So even if you don't have your best day, or you're really struggling, if the effort is there, it creates that almost image of quality because the effort is there, right? They know there's integrity, they know there's honesty in the effort. So that's a great message.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the hardest things, certainly for young kids, you've got to enjoy it, but it's finding the enjoyment in the repetition of what you're doing as well, and finding each day little bits that make you happy about what you've achieved that day. Even if it's the slightest way that a certain element might have gone, or the way that you felt in a certain move, but you've achieved something. There's a positive to the day. I've always said, like, end on a positive, but if it's been in your head a bad day, you've learned something from it as well, so long as you keep moving forward. Nothing's wasted if you understand it, if you look at what you've done and can work out, well, I know that wasn't right, and I know I can get better at doing that. It's always that desire to want to improve what you've done and come away each day with a little positive.
That's great. That's amazing. And so on those formative years and days, and kind of rising, those first international competitions, I mean, when you get to that point where you're now traveling to Germany and France, and you're from Europe, so those aren't huge trips. For us, they're like, it's for me to go to Saint-Gervais and Oberstdorf that first year in the summer of '76. It was just like, I can't believe I have to have a passport, and how am I gonna
Yes.
like, how do I do this? And it's a long flight, and do I get sleep, or what is all that about? And getting to Oberstdorf, it's, a lot of people have heard of it as a skating center, but they don't know how small it is, and how charming it is, and how beautiful just being in those mountains. And Oberstdorf, that from that first time where you guys, and I came a second, it was one of those things where, it obviously, there was something about it that appealed to you.
Yeah, well, first of all, a couple of stories. The first international I ever did was with my first partner, and it was in Czechoslovakia. And we didn't
Those were fun years to be in Czechoslovakia, right?
Oh yeah.
Not much going on.
Not a lot of gray.
But
gray. we didn't fly there. We had to drive there, and that took near 2.5 days of driving in a car. So the parents drove in. We had 2 cars. Actually, no. We were 2 couples going, and one of each parent drove. Anyway, you're cooped in the back of the car for 2.5 days. And we slept in the car. We didn't stay in a hotel at nighttime. It was constant driving.
More grumpy old man stuff. I love it.
And then when we got out, the next day was the first practice.
Stiff.
But it was so exciting to be going away and doing an international competition.
Was that in Prague,
it was a big deal.
Or Bratislava, or where was that?
Banska Bystrica.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, a long way.
Yeah, thriving metropolis. Yeah.
But then with Jayne, I remember our first Oberstdorf, and Oberstdorf used to be open-ended. Do you remember that?
Yeah. It was just a roof, right?
It was 3 sides open, and it was beautiful. But come of the evening, and you had that 9 o'clock practice, and then you had the lights on, would bring out every moth and fly. And do you remember, sort of by about 3 minutes and you're gasping for air, you'd also take in a moth or 2 on practice. Yeah.
And you smile for the cameras, and you got a bug stuck to your tooth right there.
Yeah, they were great days. And I also remember that, we would go away to those competitions to begin with, and we couldn't afford to take the coach. So we had to self-train ourselves as well, and be independent, and organize our music, organize our times from the hotel to get to the rink.
Great lessons.
But it's all about not just being told what to do, but understanding what's happening. And I think that's important for kids to not feel, to have some ownership of their career or of their skating life, as opposed to all the time being told to do this, told to do that. And eventually, I think sometimes you can be a bit resentful of it. Oh, here we go again. But if it's up to you, it's a different perspective of how you make it happen. Admittedly, we weren't 6 or 7 years old. By this time, we were 16 and 17. But at the same time, I still think there's a lot of people that could take more initiative for themselves and have more ownership of what's going on.
And that's so important. So you go through those initial international years, and then first Olympics in Lake Placid. Tell me about that experience.
Oh, you got the uniform. I have to say, the British uniform wasn't always the best. You always felt a little
Everybody
bit like
wanted
the
the Italians.
neighbors.
Everybody wanted to have the Italians uniforms. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I think the Americans were pretty good. I mean, what did you have your first year?
Cowboy hats and
a
fleece jacket and all that. Everybody wanted to trade for the Russian coats and the fur hats.
They had the bear hats, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's that sense of you've got a uniform, because for world championships or something like that, I think we got a tie.
A patch
Maybe,
to
or
put on your
badge,
jacket. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But for the Olympics, it was a kit. You know, there's a
Yeah.
tracksuit and trainers and
The Olympic rings.
you got something to the Olympic rings.
Yeah,
you can never wear the
absolutely.
Olympic rings unless it's at the Olympics.
Exactly. And so, you know, the competition
Huge.
there, exactly what you thought. Most even Rinkhoff were there.
Yeah.
You know,
We were
Lenarchuk and
still that
Karpanazov.
small fish in a big sea.
But an introduction.
But we'd sort of got noticed. And by the time 1980 Olympics, Lake Placid, we were, you know, potentially in the top 10, like yourself. And we were vying for that 4th place. We just lost out, I think, to the Canadians. But it was, you know, it's a huge deal. And so much happened at Lake Placid, if you remember. The dream team, the Miracle on Ice.
Yeah. Eric Heiden's 5 gold medals.
Heiden's, just some amazing things happened. And when we go back to Lake Placid now, because you and I have spent a lot of time in Lake Placid with Stars on Ice, you just go, you know, at the time, how huge it was, but you go back there and you go, this is really small, isn't it, for an Olympics?
Yeah.
As a venue. And
it was the last
itself.
Mayberry Olympics, right? That's what it's called.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I remember we stayed in a prison, as I recall.
Yeah.
We were
it's now
the
a prison,
for the prison, weren't we? It was built as a prison.
Well, we've always been inmates, in some way, shape, or form. And that went well, obviously. It went, you know.
Yeah, that was heady times. And that for me, I was still what you call Jayne and I, absolute professionals, because we were working 8 hours, 6 days a week, and skating outside of that. So we were true professionals. But it was after that Olympics that we decided that it was, if we wanted to take that next leap, that next step up, that we had to quit our jobs and do this full time. So for us, this was a big year from 1980 to 81.
Yeah.
And we decided that I would quit my career job as a policeman. I'd saved enough money, I think, to get us through 6 months of training. Jayne, the same. And that's where we decided to move out to West Germany, Oberstdorf, and train there for most of the summer.
Wow.
And that's what we did. And, you know, it was a big deal at the time, because unemployment in the UK was hit 2 million, I think. So it was in the papers all the time. And there we were giving up our jobs. You know, we tried to get benefits, and we went to sign on, as some skaters do, and to get their unemployment money. Unemployment money. And we went in and they said, well, what job are you interested in? We said, we're not, we just want to skate. And they said, well, you don't qualify then. So we were that naive.
Yeah. But we have a jacket. We have rings on.
Look, we want to go and skate for England. Well, I don't care. We're not giving you handouts. And it was late 1980, after the Olympics, the Winter Olympics and the Summer Olympics were the same year, as you recall, and it was in Moscow. And so our city had put aside a certain amount of money to utilize for certain athletes that were going to go to the Summer Olympics, of which the UK then boycotted
with US.
Yeah. And so there was some money left over from the city council. And so just before, or actually just at the European Championships in 1981, we got a message saying, you've got a grant from your local council, which for us was huge, and it was for 4 years. So that set our path.
Whoa, that's awesome.
Just skate.
Yeah.
It was, the total amount was £10,000 for a year.
Yeah.
But in 1980, that would get us through.
That you won the lottery. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we went to the 1981 European Championships, which were in Innsbruck.
Mm-hmm.
And, Moiseev, Manenkov were there, Kupantsev, Lenachuk, and there would have been another Russian there. Anyway, obviously Russia were the lead ice dancers. And as we went into it after the first compulsory, we found ourselves in first place, and we were like, what? And, you're like, wow, we won a compulsory. And that time there were 3 compulsories, I think.
Yeah.
Compulsory dancers. And so we went on for the second one. What's happening? We're still first. So we got through the compulsory section, and we thought, well, at least we can say we've won the compulsories. But it was, this is from 5th place.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. And then original set pattern dance, as it was then, we won again. And so it came down to the free dance, of which obviously you can lose quite easily.
Yeah, that's
the
a big
free
one.
dance
Yeah.
was 60% of the market at the time. So it was a question of, we really wanted it. I mean, you could feel it and taste it, but in reality, we didn't feel that it would happen.
Mm-hmm.
We went on, we skated our free dance the best we could, or we felt we could. We were on tender hooks waiting for all the other skaters. And by the end of the evening, we'd won. And it was out of the blue. I mean, it was somewhat unheard of at the time, jumping from where we were to first place at the Europeans. And I think everybody said, well, wow, but that won't happen again. Yeah. And of course, Worlds is around the corner 6 weeks later. Yeah. Which were in Hartford, Connecticut.
Mm-hmm. I remember vividly. Yeah.
And
you guys skated a big band that year, right? That was like
it was still old school, razor blades and pieces of music stuck together. Do you remember that?
Razor blades and all that means the reel
piece
to
of
reels,
music cut,
and then you cut it and you try to make sure that it all lined up. And then you tape it, and then
that was how we edited. And so, you had your 4 pieces of music, your fast, your slow, intermediate, end on.
Big ending.
Old school. And then we go, well, let's put it with that. Let's put that with that. And you look back now and you go, oh my goodness.
It's like prom pictures, looking back at really a brown tux with a light blue shirt. That was a conscious choice.
And mullets were in.
Yes. So that was an amazing year. I know we went on that big World Champions tour together after that. It was really amazing. Just to hear yourself announced as the World Figure Skating Championship champion, was that surreal, or was that just sort of like, oh wow,
it was unbelievable.
That's who we are now.
We were somewhat unbelieving at the time, but we didn't listen to anybody else's scores. At the time, we didn't used to watch anybody skate.
Neither. I was like, la 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 la.
And I think we were most probably first or second on in the last group. We walked out the building. You know how it's connected to the hotel there?
Yeah. That whole mall part.
Walked out, came back when we thought everybody finished. And we were looking at Betty, our coach at the time.
Betty Calloway.
Yes. And we were looking at some indication of, how did we do? And she was just like, give us nothing. And we were just waiting for somebody to tell us, how did we do? And eventually she said, oh, you better put your skates on, dear, because the ceremony will be in a minute. And we said, oh, where did we finish? She said, oh, you won. And it was like, it was one of those moments, And I think the first time you go out and you stand on the podium rostrum and your flags, your home country flag is at the top as it's being raised and the national anthem's being played. It's momentous. It's irreplaceable. It's one of those times in your life that you will always remember.
It's that moment that justifies all the other sacrifices and
Yeah.
all the other injuries you work through and all the other things. It's kind of like that destination, and it goes, okay, we gotta get back to work now. It's like 10 minutes of like, yes, that feels so good. It's
And
like,
literally for
okay,
us, that's how it was. We would come back and the next week we would start prep for the next year. We would,
and that was
unless there was a tour.
year. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think we did do the tour, but I mean, well, it was like 15 cities.
Okay,
then,
that was the
it?
1 year you did the tour.
There you go. We'll get into that at some point.
No, we'll never get into that. But so the next year was the year that really, like, that was cemented you guys as innovators. As I remember the first time I got word, you've got to watch Jayne and Chris at Europeans because you've never seen anything like this. And you alluded to it earlier, but it was the Mac and Mabel number that was just, it was like ripples throughout the earth. It was like, wait a minute, they're just sort of taking the rules and saying, okay, those aren't really rules. They're more like, you know, they're more like suggestions. We're going to go and we're going to skate differently than anyone's ever skated. And we're going to draw more eyeballs to ice dancing than has ever been there before, And tell us about Mac and Mabel, because that was just for all of our skaters. YouTube it. It's just so remarkable. And the ground that it broke was beyond anything I'd ever experienced.
Oh, it's very kind of you, all those words. You look back at it now and you still think, you know, it's like, at the time it was the best in the world, but you look at what people are doing now, it's amazing. But at the time, yeah, it was a concept piece.
Yeah, but I'll give you this. That number gave permission to others to kind of go in that direction. But before that, it was all in that little box, 4 pieces of music, all different rhythms, all based in ballroom dancing. And you just said, okay, those are suggestions, but how about this? And it just went crazy after that. Yeah, it was unbelievable.
It was a concept piece, and it was really telling a story. It was about these 2 people. Thank you. Max Sennett and Mabel Norman. Max Sennett, who was the director and producer of these huge musicals, or rather black and white movies, silent movies with Keystone Cops. And his heroine was Mabel Norman. And they had this sort of relationship that was love-hate. But it was all based around a big movie theme as well. And so to be able to put it all in and try and create a story, a concept, a look, and the music was all orchestrated. And so there was none of this editing of music and making it sound different. It all seamlessly moved from one piece to the next piece. And as I say, it told a story. It was the overture to the actual musical that had been on Broadway, written by Jerry Herman. And so, you know, we spent a lot of time looking at musicals, researching. There are moments in it that you'll see, you know, the train, the silent movie chase parts, the melodrama, the love story, all of those little things sort of coming together within the piece. And I think, you know, at the time it was original and new and different. And so, yeah, people started talking about it. And that gave us permission to, you know, that mantle that you wear of world champion, that you lead and don't follow. And then you take on that feeling of, well, where are we going next? What's the next thing? People are
pressure's on now. Yeah. Getting there is one thing. Staying there is completely different, right? Oh, your sound went off again. Oh, your mic's off. Can you turn your mic back on? There you go.
Are we go? Are we back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay. Yeah, the pressure of staying there is greater. You know, the underdog is a great place to be, but once you're the top dog, it's a harder place to be.
Yeah, that's for sure. And so from Mac and Mabel, which, you know, you won the world championship, you started collecting these things that like a lot of our skaters don't, they've heard about, but they don't really know exactly what they are. You started collecting these things called 6.0s, which were perfect scores, you know, and it really, really started then. And so you go to the next year and there's so much anticipation, expectation from the Mac and Mabel thing. Where are you going to go now? And you started working with Michael Crawford, who was the original Phantom of the Opera, which was amazing. Correct. I remember seeing him at the Worlds that year, and that was just like, I didn't know who he was. Now I know, you know, you found out who he was later on, because he was very well respected in, you know, in the UK and the West End and all that. But you went into the next year, you did a Barnum, right?
That's right. Yeah, he'd been in the musical Barnum. And it's through his connection we went to see the musical, because actually at the end of Worlds in '82, we were on tour in Europe, and we had the opportunity to go and see the Bolshoi, Bolshoi Ballet, or the Russian Circus. And everybody said, we're going to the Bolshoi, we want to go to the Bolshoi. And something sparked in my head, circus. And I went to see the Russian Circus, you know, an old Russian circus, huge traditions in Russia and in Moscow. And it sparked the idea of trying to put this on ice. And so when we got back to, decline. Am I back?
There you go. Yeah, you're back.
When we got back to the UK, the first thing I wanted to do is see something circusy, and Barnum was on, the musical. And then Michael Crawford was there. So we'd had some popularity by just winning Worlds, and he saw us in the audience and invited us backstage afterwards to say hello. And so we had the opportunity, and we got talking to him, and we formed a friendship. And then he helped us with the orchestra that played Barnum, that we had an original piece of music
that's unbelievable.
Scored for us, with all the concepts of Barnum put into it. And so then we took that, with a little bit of money they had, but also the musicians doing it on their own time, of going into a studio and recording this bespoke overture of Barnum for us, exactly to, 4 minutes and a few seconds.
What a luxury that is, right? Because it's exactly what you want, exactly what you need.
Yeah, that was
awesome.
And this is before the days of computer editing, where you can do so much with music now. To actually have an arranger, the MD of the show, arrange the music for you, and have live musicians playing it in the studio was amazing, absolutely amazing. And that took us to Barnum.
Yeah, and that won another Worlds, and really kept it really solidified your image as innovators and as people that were going to just really do things that really at that time no one else in the world could do. So you were separating yourself from the rest of the sport. And then the big expectation came around, because you just won 3 Worlds, and now you're going to go into the Olympics as easily the most popular skaters in the world at that point.
It was ours to lose at that point. Yeah.
Well, and it was huge. I remember being in Sarajevo, and the anticipation of that night. I think you had royalty that came in from
Princess Anne
the UK.
Was there, yeah.
Princess Anne was there, but I mean, there was standing room only in that Cetra arena. And you guys went in and you did something that was so controversial that year that, I mean, people didn't know what to do. I mean, they were just all up in arms, because you did one piece of music from beginning to end that wasn't like an overture to like Mac and Mabel, or like the versatility of Barnum or anything. It was just one piece of music. It was Bolero from very beginning to the very end. And it was a masterclass in creativity and in quality, but a lot of the judges were up in arms about Bolero. I'll talk about that.
Yeah, no, it was it was definitely, when you talk about it now, it sounds like the jeopardy in choosing such a controversial piece of music. But at the time in our heads, what we've been doing when we were training, we were using Bolero, we play it as a warm-up, because the original length of it is about 18 minutes. And so we get on the rink in Oberstdorf and skate around, do all our warm-up that would take 18 minutes. And by that time, we felt, okay, we're ready to train. So the minute Worlds are finished, Barnum was done and dusted, you know, you come back to the drawing board. What's next year? What's next year?
Oh no, yeah.
As we sat in the room with our friends, Bobby and Courtney, the English judge and coach at the time, and Betty, and we just, you know, a close group of friends, and eventually I'll claim it, but Jayne may say she claims it, who knows. But Bolero came up, and the minute we said it, there was no turning back. It was, you just thought about it, and you went, it's perfect. It's original. It has this driving beat right from the beginning. It crescendos, and yet within it, that we built this intense relationship, which what we tried to portray from the beginning to end. And that was it. From in our hearts, there's no going back, and that's what I would say to a lot of people. Listen to what speaks to you, musically and conceptually as well. Don't dilute things down. Sometimes be driven if you have a passion and a belief, and that was Bolero for us. When we first, but you know, it became a bit of a premiere that we kept it all under wraps because people wanted to know, what are you skating to, and when are you competing it? And so it became quite a secret, and we'd sort of practice behind closed doors as much as we could. And so the unveiling really was at our national championships. And I think it was so original that, and we were world champions, and so, you know, we
world champions,
we did we did well. We did well, let's say. But that then leads to the European Championships. And the European Championships is really the precursor to the Olympics, because the order of events are Europeans, Olympics, Worlds. And so the Europeans were really important to do well, and in fact to win, because that set the stage for the Olympics, certainly, you know, from a nice dance point of view. So Europeans were key, and it was in Hungary, which still at the time was somewhat Eastern Bloc, but they were moving out of that. The panel wasn't necessarily a great panel of judges for us, and there were rumors about people were looking for infringements. You know, we started our knees.
Well,
the
they
music's
always
too
want to topple
long.
the king. Yeah, let's
I mean,
topple the king and let's create new whatever.
You know, let's go back to the music. The music, again, we had recorded, because Bolero is 18 minutes long.
It's a lot.
So we wanted the same effect over
talk about breaking
4 minutes,
the rules, right? An 18-minute long program.
So we got an arranger to look at it, break it apart, dissect it, look at the parts. And he said, the best I can do is get it to 4 minutes, 28 seconds. And so out of necessity, we started on our knees. And the stopwatch at that time didn't start until you started skating. And you will see 18 seconds later, Jayne's blades touch the ice. So that whole preset of on the knees and movement was a scene set.
I did not know that.
But it wasn't a recorded time until I lifted Jayne over the shoulder and her blades touched the ice, stopwatch. And that happened at 4 minutes, 10 seconds. And so that's, you know, that iconic opening move and look came out of necessity. Exactly. So it was all, you know, and getting the music recorded. We, to begin with, we would do it, somebody put it on a piano for us. And so we just had a guide track of piano for about 4 months before we actually got into the studio and then started creating it. And we created it on what was called a Fairlight at the time, which was controversial in the music and musicians because it was the first sort of computer generated music, because we couldn't afford an orchestra. And so we would use this early computer to create the sound and the volume that Bolero requires. And so at the European Championships, as I say, there was like, oh, people are looking for the infringements. And we had one move that would possibly be that another gray area. And so literally in the last 5 minutes of the last rehearsal before the free dance, we changed it on the ice. And then we competed that evening with the change in.
Wow, that's great. Yeah.
Well, you know, when you've been practicing something, we don't have the amount of events that they have these days.
Yeah, too many, I think.
And so you've spent 9 months doing something one way, and in the last 5 minutes you're changing it before the competition. So to the surprise of the judges that were looking for the infringements, it wasn't there. And so we won the European Championships, which was, the scene set for the Olympics, really.
Yeah. And it was all straight 6.0s, like perfect
the Europeans,
scores.
I think we got a few. I think actually the Olympics might have been the most.
But
not sure about
extraordinary.
That.
Yeah. So but it just the way that you're able to revolutionize the sport, and then you had a professional career where the first steps were straight to Australia. You were able to leverage your popularity into really building something phenomenal and great, and kind of out of the view of your home country, which I'm sure you couldn't take 2 steps into your home country without being completely pummeled with people. But you've got this next fame and this next journey, and you did it I think better than it's ever been done, because you were able to spread it around from your own tour, and then you went into a traditional show, and then you came to Stars on Ice, and then you went back and did a Russian all-star thing. But for our skaters, they've just witnessed this journey. And it really is, I'd say, a journey like no other. What would be your kind of words of encouragement as they are embarking on this adventure?
Skating has been a part of my life, and I've woken up to it every day of my life, just about. And it's never been a chore. And I'm not saying, I love doing it, but it's a part of me. It's become a part of me. And I think at whatever level you take on skating or get out of skating, there's always something, like almost any sport. There's a discipline. There's something that you take away from it in the way that you motivate the way that you train, your responsibility for the way that you are and the way that you train, and how you push yourself, technically or creatively. All of these elements are part of what a character building.
Yeah.
And whether you stop when you're a teenager to go on to college, these are life lessons that can stay with you forever, whether you become an Olympic champion, a doctor, or a successful family person. Whatever it is, these traits that you started at an early age just benefit you moving forward. So understand those, take them on board as part of growing as a person, and find enjoyment in the difficulty.
Yeah, and that's it. That's the key, is find enjoyment in the challenge, find enjoyment in the failure, find enjoyment in the difficulty, find enjoyment in the commitment, that represents everything that you've lived and created, and still to this day you're choreographing, and you're very involved in the competitive scene, and people come to you all the time, and you know, you're not afraid of taking those risks of doing things that are a little edgy, doing things that are a little bit provocative, and you've continued that journey that you started all those years ago by just sort of saying, you know, I think we need to head in this direction. It may not be, you know, what people are expecting, but it's okay.
You know,
because
people
it comes
like to
from
use
here.
words of choreography and originality, and I just say, let's go make some steps up. You know,
Let's go
and
make some steps up.
I've worked with other young choreographers coming up, and I say, no steps wrong. There's not a wrong step. It's just the step that you want to do there and then.
That's
So
awesome.
choreography and the creativity, allow it to happen. Don't try and second guess yourself all the time, but keep re-looking at what you're doing and evaluate and understand your audience.
Yep. That's awesome. Well, hey, Chris, man, you're the best of the best of the best, and I'm so grateful
Scott, thank
for
you.
all the time you spent. And you know,
I need to say thank you too. Thank you so much.
Corey's here.
This has
You're
been
welcome.
so amazing.
Thank you.
Christopher, I appreciate you being here with our athletes more than you know. Thank you so much. We can't wait for you to visit us in Nashville too.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's a
We
deal.
appreciate
It's a
everything
direct
you brought
flight.
today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Thanks everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Bye.